All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Um, my name is Evan Schumacher. If you are new to the channel, welcome. Um, Today, I'm going to go into part 3 of this concept. I started a few weeks ago. Um, we're going to take our concept, which is this guy. I've just dropped him on my reference board. We're going to start bringing him into Zbrush, doing a bit of a 3D sculpt here. Now, normally I would probably do a little bit more work on the concept, probably continue on with the color pass. As you can see from our references, there's a lot of different stuff we can do here. And really, as far as this got was just sort of a basic color wash, just to show a little bit of light and shadow here and to kind of allude to a color palette. But I think, there are a lot of great ideas that we can pull from here. So probably what I'll do, just because I really want to get into the sculpt and kind of break things up a little bit, I'm gonna work on the sculpt for a while, and then maybe we can kind of circle back and maybe look at some ways that we may be able to just implement the rest of the color in the sculpt. Again, this isn't something I would necessarily normally recommend in a development pipeline. We would want to put as much in the concept as we can, because usually we would be passing it on to another 3D artist. But since I am the concept and 3D artist in this case, and yeah, sometimes as a 3D artist you may be tasked with something like that. At the company I currently work at, that's something we have to do sometimes, just because it's a smaller company. Might pass something on to the 3D artist where it's like, hey, we don't have time to really fully flesh this out. Try to come up with a few different color variations for this, or kind of finish it off in the 3D phase, which is again not optimal, but it's something that due to production squeezes or whatever can happen sometimes. So not outside of the realm of possibility in the professional world. And since here we're just kind of doing this for fun, that's something we can do here. So that's one thing to note right off the bat. We're going to focus mostly on the sculpt, and then we might circle back to do some color passes. As usual, I think I've got the system pretty well locked in at this point, but if you do have any issues with the audio or video, just let me know in the chat. And as well, if you're tuning in, just pop in and say hi. I know it's been a long time since I've been doing these streams, but I appreciate those of you who have hopped in the last couple streams. Yeah, this has just been really fun. This is something I've been looking forward to all week, so I appreciate you guys coming in and saying hi, and just watching me goof around and make this guy. So another thing I actually wanted to mention for those of you who are, pretty much applies to anybody, but especially for artists looking for references, I just pulled a bunch of these off of Pinterest, and I'm just gonna do on PureRef, Control Alt Up, and then Control P. That's my basic organizational workflow. I'm just kind of keeping these things around. Control Alt Up, Control P. It's good to keep things organized here. I'm just adding this onto another PureRef sheet I already had for a different project, and I'm keeping the concept here at the center. In fact, I'm probably going to I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. So I want the scale to be similar. I have a little bit too much blank space on either side here, but it doesn't really matter. So I want to get my PureRef board set up. I'm just going to take all this, actually. I'm just going to move it over here. We can pan around and stuff while we're working, but I'm just going to move this off screen for now. And one thing I did want to show you guys is if you are looking for references for anything, let's see here. So Pinterest uh, has actually gotten a lot better in terms of its filtering tools. And when all the AI stuff started to hit, it was kind of a bummer because it just kind of flooded Pinterest with all this kind of slop stuff, which is not good for references. Aside from the other problems that go along with that, but um, they've implemented a tool to help filter out most of that stuff, which is actually the most successful tool I've seen for this. Even like Google searches or DuckDuckGo searches, which is what I use, don't do as good a job of this. So I just wanted to show you guys quickly, if you're looking for references and stuff, Pinterest is now actually one of the best ways to do that. So if we go to settings, over here, settings, and you go to refine your recommendations, there's a tab for AI content. And if you go ahead and switch all of this stuff off, I don't think they have this option on mobile, but once you set it up on your account, if you're using the same account, I believe it will carry over to mobile. But if you search something, really, like what's the most obvious thing? Fantasy warrior something, that's usually something fantasy is where you get most of that stuff. And even with something like this, you get a few things pop up here and there. It's funny, even at this point, it's pretty easy to identify usually, but, yeah, maybe that. And sometimes they even include a tag on the thing that shows, yeah, that's probably, but for most things, like even if I was just, if I just did a Google search of the same thing, like 75% of this would be AI probably. So, and once you start clicking around, you'll notice like you really, you start seeing a lot more, organic artwork, and it's really actually filtering out most of that stuff, which is really cool. So I just wanted to point that out. I was just going through some, even if we go to giant lobster, things that are not normally things you would have a photograph of, like this. I don't know what the hell this is. But I don't know, maybe I don't think that's real, but it's still probably not, AI. So probably just some bad Photoshop, which is, arguably better in some cases. It's ridiculous. Anyway, yeah, so really useful. I highly recommend turning those settings off if you're looking for references and stuff, or if you're just looking for inspiration. Sometimes you just want to see something that's, part of reality, or at least based in reality. So just wanted to point that out. Really useful tool there. So yeah, let's dive into this sculpt. So the other question that we have to answer for ourselves is, are we just doing there are kind of two different ways you can go about go about approaching something like this in ZBrush. And one is if we're creating, an actual game or VFX asset that we want to animate, and the other is just if we want to do a 3D sculpt or 3D concept, basically. And there is a significant difference in how we approach those, mostly towards the second half of the development process. So let me see if I can find a good example here. Let's try this. So a 3D sculpt, like, oops, there we go. A 3D sculpt or 3D concept is something like this, where, this is something I did earlier last summer for a course, and I've posed it as part of the high poly, basically. So if we go to the if we go to the object here, yeah, there's some basic topology there, but it's not designed to animate. It's designed just to be kind of a proof of concept. yeah, with this topology, maybe we could animate something, but even so, we would have to take the high poly and bake it down to this low poly, and this is not a good pose to uh, this is not a good pose to animate in. You know, if we want to animate something, we want it to be in like, you know, a pose or a T pose or something like that, which this was at some point in development, but at a certain point, I broke out of the A pose and you know, started posing it to further refine the sculpt. So the workflow is a little bit different for both of those. The start of it, you know, basically can be the same depending upon your approach. You can start without symmetry or anything, and you just start kind of doing it the old school way and kind of going in and you know, sculpting it out more organically, like you would with a piece of clay, and not worrying about symmetry or anything like that, or setting it up in a particular pose. Um, but if you are wanting to animate it at some point, you're going to want to retopologize it, bake that down, and that requires a bit more of a process. Generally, much more of a time-intensive process. So I'm still kind of on the fence about which way I want to go. Like I said, I love retopology and sort of the whole game development pipeline. If that's something that you would want to see, please, you know, drop a comment. Even if it's after the stream, you know, that would be useful to know. Or if you want something that's a little bit quicker, that's just more of a cool 3D sculpt, kind of proof of concept, um, you know, we can do that too, depending upon what's more interesting for you guys in your workflow. Doing a full game character or something like that with retopology and baking and materials and everything like that is definitely more of a time intensive process. And as I've said before, I'm not sure how entertaining watching the retopology process would be. For me, it's very satisfying. So, you know, maybe it doesn't really matter so much, um, but yeah, it can take a while, and um, but I don't know. We'll kind of see where it goes. We don't really have to necessarily make that decision for a while. It does. We do have to plan a few things, like for example, you know, let's bring up our reference here. So with this guy, you know, if we're just doing it just might change a little bit about how we approach certain things, especially like these kind of feathery bits. Do we want to try to make cards for those, which would basically be, what is my draw tool again? Yeah. You know, basically, if we wanted to put this in a game, we would probably bake these down into a few different cards with like kind of opacity layers. You know, we might do the same thing here. And stuff like that. But if we're just doing you know, if we're just doing probably the same thing back here, we would do a bunch of cards like this. Have to make a few different versions of that, kind of bake them down or repeat them to save UV space. But if we're just doing a sculpt, you know, we can be very literal about it. We can create, you know, tons of tiny little pointy details, you know, and we don't really have to worry so much about poly count or anything like that. We can just kind of make it look cool. Of course, if we want to pose it, then, you know, it does become a little bit more complicated. So that's something we're going to have to decide at some point. All right. So let's got my refs up. And we could start with something like human shaped, but this is like not even really close enough to human to really justify that, and I like starting from scratch anyway. So we just started with like a Dynamesh sphere, and you know, we're just going to, I think we could use snake hook. Might be a good way to go about this. So this is Sculptris Pro. So let's turn on Sculptris Pro. There we go. So that's just going to... maybe I don't want to go about it this way. Let's try it. I don't know. There's 100 different ways to go about this. This is definitely a strange one, but I'm just kind of mapping out the basic, making like the Kool-Aid guy here. There's not really like one right way to do this. I'm probably going to, let's turn on Dynamesh actually. Dynamesh is on. Let's lower the resolution. See, is that working? Oh, there we go. Let's try that again. Let's go a little higher. There we go. All right, I'm actually just going to keep this in the corner so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Get the general silhouette first, and then we'll go into the details. So, yeah, that's very important. Let's inflate this out. We want to nail down the basic silhouette before we make any big detail moves. And at some point, probably we're going to want to separate out some of these plates too into different subtools. But you know, for now, we can just kind of get the sketch in a good place. Yeah, I'd be curious how many of you are using Zbrush or looking to get into 3D. I haven't really done many 3D 3D projects on this channel, or any really. I've done some like Blender stuff, but again, that was kind of back when I didn't really know how to do a lot of this stuff. So, you know, take all that with a grain of salt. The other thing I probably, you know, will want to decide at some point is where we're going to break the symmetry. Like, we have one shoulder piece that's bigger than the other, which will be fine. That'll probably just be a separate piece. And I kind of, basically what I'll generally do is I will sculpt out as much as I can symmetrically first, and then at a certain point we'll break symmetry where we need it. And that's just a really great way to save time. But we don't want to rely on symmetry too much. You know, our final product, the more asymmetry we introduce, the more organic and sort of natural looking it's going to look. We don't want something that's completely symmetrical, especially for something like this that's supposed to be organic. But also just in general, it's not a great design move. So we're going to start out with symmetry for the basic form. But eventually we're going to start to break out some asymmetrical parts. And if we are going to animate this, which I'm still, let's do lasso, skip. If we are going to animate this, probably want to have a little bit more space under the arms. I don't ever really do a T-pose. I think it's really hard to make something look kind of natural looking. You know, this is just kind of a rare position, but it does have its advantages when animating. But I think in terms of just making like a strong character, Sometimes just an A pose is preferable. I don't know. I'm sure there are better people to discuss the pros and cons of each, but the important thing is just leaving a little bit of arm space under here, because if we don't, when it goes to animate, it's just going to stretch really awkwardly. So we want to make sure we take that into account. So I'm just using the move tool and the inflate tool. Sometimes I actually have those hooked up to different hotkeys that I forget about sometimes, but I have inflate hooked up to 6. Move tool is hooked up to 2. That's something you have to set up manually, but once you do, it's really really useful. I also have, as you might have noticed, I have kind of a custom ZBrush interface here as well. There are plenty of great tutorials on setting that up. It's pretty easy, but basically there's an enable customize feature, which I think is buried in one of these menus, but I just included it as a button. So once I toggle that on, I can basically use Control Alt to move buttons around and stuff, and then I will disable customize and then go to preferences and config, I believe, store config. I think that's it. All right, so still. And we do still have Sculptress Pro activated, so when I'm using inflate, it's actually whoops, that's polish. I'm using inflate, which is 7. There we go. It's actually reworking the mesh. To increase the intensity a little bit, so you can really block this in. I'll worry about the individual fingers and stuff later. Yeah, this guy's looking pretty strong. Also looking like one of those thumb things from Spy Kids a little bit right now. I hope there's someone out there that gets that reference. That's kind of dating myself a little bit there, but those things were weird, man. That first Spy Kids movie was absolutely horrific. It's amazing how many of those like movies that were geared towards kids just ended up like, I don't know, they seem to have no sense for like how messed up they actually were. That one was wildly disturbing. I'm gonna turn off Sculptress Pro. I think we're in a good spot in terms of our overall. Let's see, you want to make sure our pose is natural too. So that's an easy mistake to make, is like getting too far in the sculpt and you realize like he's just got a weird pose going on. So, which is, I don't know, easy enough to fix, but better sooner than later. I want to give him a little bit of a natural posture. Getting that S shape that we talked about in stream 1 or part 1. You know, not just straight up and down. We want to distribute the weight in kind of a a more dynamic way. I think he had a little bit more leg in the concept. So I'm going to move up the hips a little bit. And let's just hit the feet a little. Let's do trim dynamic. And want to move out some of those toe things. Let's just do a quick this pen. Let's do a quick mask out on these. Just pull them out. Dynamesh. Let's do the same thing here. Doesn't have to be exact. Just want to get, whoops. Somebody was talking in the last stream about Zbrush's movement controls, which I think are terrible, but it's just something you gotta deal with. Sometimes it gets a little bit wonky. I've mostly gotten used to them, but they still really irritate me sometimes. Let's look at our foot profile here. I think we want to have a little bit more space in the center, and then the bigger one was on the inside, the smaller one on the outside. And then on the back we have not quite a full toe, I guess. It's more of a heel. We have kind of a bit of a hourglass shape on the legs. Does not have to be exact. Mostly we just want to make sure that any protrusions that we're setting up are properly mapped out before we go into detailing them too much. Once we start like Z-remeshing stuff, it gets a lot more tedious to rework stuff like hands and smaller digits and stuff. So we want to kind of map those out as best we can sooner than later. So we got some crusty bits happening here. But we don't want to lose that kind of chunky hourglass kind of shape here. Let's look at it from the side. Looks like we want to shift things forward a little bit. Always want to keep checking the silhouette, make sure things are reading as intended. And in our concept, I think our knees are quite a bit higher. So I'm just going to nudge those up. All right. Now let's go to the arms. We have 3 digits. Maybe I can just use the snake hook for this. Turn on Sculptress. Let's just do these. That's arm 1, or digit 1, 2, 3. Close enough. And then we can refine these a little bit. Maybe inflate 7. Yeah, I mean, this is like a super wobbly, wonky shape right now, but nothing that a little nudging with the move tool won't help. Mostly what I want to make sure we get is this kind of like curved, tapered sort of shape. You know, I want it to be, even though we have these other little digits sticking out, I want to make sure that, you know, overall silhouette is being preserved there. So, just going to keep nudging things around. Don't worry if everything isn't super straight at this point, just using shift to smooth some of this out. It looks like this one is actually quite a bit further up. So let's do that. Dynamesh. Right now my Sculptress is based on the size of my brush, so you can use that to your advantage to kind of play with that a little bit. If you want greater or smaller resolution in some areas, you can do that. All right, so from the front, we do have that nice kind of teardrop shape. From the side, we pretty much have it, except with these smaller kind of bits sticking out. And again, I want to make sure I'm doing, this is another one of those examples where, like, as a 3D artist, if you are not paying attention to specific, or if you don't have you know, a basic understanding of some design principles, where something like this could easily get missed. You know, you might see the concept and you're like, oh, he has 3 fingers. So you go in and you create 3 fingers of the same length, you know. And it could be very easy to miss that, you know, we are trying to do a big, medium, small kind of thing. Or actually, it might be the opposite. So we may want to push that. This might be our medium shape, and the thumb is kind of our smaller shape. And again, this isn't a hard and fast rule or anything. Obviously, there are exceptions, and it doesn't have to be quite that literal every time. But, and especially because these are different kind of shape types, so even though they might be sort of 2 smaller or 2 medium shapes, this one's kind of shorter and thicker, and this one is longer and thinner. So it's a shorthand for variety, but big, medium, small is a really easy thing to remember and wrap your brain around. So it's something I use all the time. And like I said, you know, it's something we are putting in our concept, and it's something we want to continue to reinforce as we're moving into the 3D sculpt, you know, even with smaller decisions along the way. Yeah, it's the most important with larger sort of forms and silhouettes, but it's important on every level, you know, in details as well. So I'm not actually separating out any plates at this point. It actually may not even be necessary to do that in most cases. But what I am doing is I'm just starting to use masking to roughly kind of pull them out, where I think there's going to be some overlap, some different segments, just kind of sketching it out. And then we'll kind of decide exactly how we're going to approach that a bit later on. Just re-dynameshing and working with like a really really low resolution as well. I feel like I accidentally nudged that. It's not how I meant it to look. Still kind of wibble wobbly, but yeah, I definitely accidentally pushed that somewhere I didn't mean to. But it's okay. Let's see, another thing we can start to do is sculpting in with the clay brush, which is, I have that mapped to 2. I'm going to turn off Sculptress. And I'm just going to start, not detailing necessarily, but actually, you know what, before I even do that, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because we still have I think our head just could use a little bit more definition before we get into that. So I'm going to do that. Let's see. Probably going with a damn standard, which can be useful for just kind of sketching some things out. Probably want to, let's see, his head's kind of like pushing down a little bit. And it's kind of this big back plate. So he's not quite a hunchback, but you know, he's pretty close. Let's look at the back view. Actually, I think I'm giving him a little too much back there. He needs a little bit more neck. Again, want to really make sure I'm dialing in the overall forms here before I get too far into anything. So this comes out a little bit more. Probably could use an inflate so it doesn't get too thin just yet. Do a quick clay brush pass. Let's see here. Not going to get too far into it, but I'm just going to kind of get some general kind of things going on here. Again, I'm not changing the resolution for the Dynamesh or anything. Just keeping it very very low poly here. And I feel like in our concept, he's got a little bit better posture. You know, here he's looking a little bit hunched. So I'm going to go to move, really big here. And let's just, I'm gonna move the hips forward. Remember, we don't want him to be like a total, you know, animal beast kind of guy. We want him to have some, you know, some kind of intelligence. I think that's a little bit better. I think his chest kind of comes out a little bit more. Again, I'm keeping that S shape, but I'm moving the hips forward a little bit. Actually, this is just getting in the way. So just gonna hide that for a minute. He's a lobster with good posture. Kind of. And we can give him a little, give him a few spikes if we want, just to, sometimes it's just helpful to include a little of this just to make sure I'm roughly on track with the concept here. But again, this is all not getting into any details quite yet. Now we can start kind of sketching in some of these overall forms. For now, I think for now I'm going to use the, well, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, at some point I'm going to separate out one of the shoulders. Because we don't have a really good view of the right shoulder, but I'm gonna try to, again, if I was the concept artist here and I was passing this on to a 3D artist, that's something I would want to probably break out for them. But for now, I'm just going to try to fill in the gaps. And it's good to see how the shoulder and chest pieces are going to fit together. It's going to be important. All right, go back to the clay brush. Let's kind of loosely follow this pattern. And anytime things get a little crunchy, just going to hit it with another Dynamesh. I'm not sure why this draw menu is open. Oh, Dynamesh got turned off. I don't know why. think we have a little bit more stomach to work with. Yeah. The clay brush is really, actually, I'm going to switch to a different alpha here. I'll go to alpha 48. It can be a little bit more of a, give you less of those kind of jagged edges, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Actually, kind of preferred the other one. I kind of do want those sharp edges because I really want to kind of sculpt aggressively right now. Really, really cut this stuff out. Get some of our other creatures in here. What was the one I was looking at earlier? These guys. Oh, I was watching a lot of videos about different crabs and crustaceans. Really kind of fascinating development there. Crabs are like there's a term for it, which I can't remember now. But it's basically it's like a form that evolution tends to repeat on many different uh, evolutionary branches. So there are a lot of examples of convergent evolution to the crab form, basically. So a lot of the things that we see and consider to be crabs are actually very distantly related from one another. They're just kind of different species that have evolved convergently to sort of this this crab form. Which is why there's like a bunch of memes about like all life leads to crab, or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, really interesting. And a lot of them started out as sort of lobster or shrimp like um, creatures. And then, man, I don't have a good picture of it here, but they actually evolved to, they still have this flap, this tail thing, but it's actually evolved to kind of fuse in with their body. You can kind of see like the edge of it here. It's just kind of fused underneath them, but they still have this tail. And actually, some of them have de-evolved to, or re-evolved, whatever, to have that tail once again. And yeah, they're just really really fascinating creatures. Look it up on YouTube. It's a great video. Um, something about just search like crab evolution. Um, let's get this shape locked in here. Got kind of a double layer. Pull this down a little bit. Trying to create these areas of organic repetition. And then, of course, we've got all these barnacles and things, which are asymmetrical, but I'm just going to kind of loosely texture these out for now. This is basically the equivalent of a, pencil sketch. but in 3D. And I'm not really using smoothing or anything like that. Or at least I'm trying to avoid it. I want to keep the shapes pretty rough and sketchy right now. Also not worrying too much about different plate overlap or anything like that. I'm just kind of mostly just marking where they are, where the different plates are, and maybe even getting into a little bit too much detail here, but there is kind of an area here where this back plate section separates out, so I want to mark that off. Got kind of this thing going here. I am going to smooth this out because I want to rework it. I kind of have a few different things happening here. I'm just going to mostly just sketch them out. Then we have one bigger plate here. Let's see. There. I'll have this be a little bit more convex. All right, we have another plate here. This comes out a little bit. Another plate here. Another one here. And then this comes out like that. That's good enough for now. Let's see here how it stacks up. I think I'm just going to shift this a little bit. Tail a little bit wider. If this were a true lobster, this is where all the meat would be in the tail, so we want to have a little bit of meat there. Probably not going to eat this guy though. I feel like that would be a mistake. Actually keeping this a little bit smoother since this is actually kind of supposed to be one of the areas of rest. Even when we go into detail that, we'll probably want to keep it minimal. All right, let me go back to the front because I think this part is not exactly right. Again, I'm seeing a little bit more. The shoulders kind of back and in. It's a little bit tankier, so I don't want to give him a very super slim waist or anything. All right, let's go in. Start to let's go 4 to go to damn standard. Start to sketch some of these things out. Then I can use Alt actually to push that edge back out. So I'm just using the regular brush to carve it in, and then Alt to reinforce that edge. It's a very quick and simple way to create these plates. I'm probably getting into a little bit too much detail there, so let's keep it moving. Let's look at the back view again. We do have these. I think this comes up to about here. We have some plates underneath, kind of mimic the rib cage and muscle. And then we have our front plate coming to about here. And I think we have another back plate coming right about here. Again, this is kind of a vague area in our design, so we're kind of filling in some of the gaps there, but all right, back to 3, to our clay build brush. I'm actually going to, let's go to mask lasso. I'm going to just assign these a different mesh group so I can quickly hide them if I need to. Because right now I just want to focus on the legs. So overall, I think we want to tuck this in a little bit and pull out. So we want to kind of like allude to the rhythm of the musculature that this is inspired from, even though he's not showing those particular muscles. Do want to ground them in something close to that. Oops. I don't want to do that quite yet. I'm going to tuck in this waist a little bit. He's tanky, but we want him to be able to twist and move. And a lot of this we're just going to kind of leave blank for now, since this piece is going to be one of our areas of rest. So probably just going to define the edges and then move on a little bit. It's probably something that could benefit from some additional concepting, just in terms of the details that we can expect here, but I'm not super concerned about it. I think we'll be able to fill in the gaps ourselves. Let's take a look at the back. Actually, maybe I'll just keep this open so we can look at both at once. So see on the back here, looks like this kind of pops out and then goes back down. Again, it's a lot easier when we have these things defined in concept so that we can focus on, you know, how it's represented in 3 dimensions versus trying to design all this stuff, all these different shapes. Jesus. ZBrush movement controls just being difficult. All right, so this slides underneath. Should be good for now. Just going to kind of, until we have these areas properly remeshed to get some kind of smoother effects here, I'm just going to use the clay brush to kind of help smooth out some of this wobbliness. It's really good for just kind of averaging depth in different areas, so kind of using it again just kind of as like a sketching tool. Switching between adding and subtracting here with Alt. This is a lot more just like how you would approach this with traditional clay, which is closer to how I prefer to do things. They're, you know, much more technical ways to approach things. I try to keep things pretty organic. That's just what I'm more comfortable with, but. And I think, I don't know, it could be argued it produces results with a little bit more character to them. There's another version of this process where I would start in Blender and kind of mock these things out in a low poly format to get like really smooth curves and stuff, but that's more something I would do with hard surface objects and things that needed to be like really mathematically precise. It's not really something we need here because this is all very organic. Let's try something here. Let's go to mask. Come on, mask hard pen. Let's just do a little something like this. Reverse it, move. There we go. I guess I can remesh, dynamesh. Do the same thing with some of these areas. Let's see here. I want to go down like this, and then, whoops, lip there, something like that. Let's reverse it. Use our move. I guess we could use inflate too. Doesn't really matter. This can be just a little bit quicker than trying to, sketch this all out by hand. Kind of allows us to manipulate it a bit too if we want to drag it out. Again, we're not separating these pieces yet, or I don't know, maybe not ever, but then remesh it. And we have something pretty close. And then we can refine it with our damn standard. Let's do the same thing on the bottom. So, so it comes out like that. And on the back, actually we want it to dip down. We're leaving room for that knee to flex backwards. And on the interior, goes up again. Doesn't have to be exact. All right, let's reverse. Whoops, reverse selection, move, and push these things out. Actually, we could have just masked out the bottom while we were in here, but it's okay. We can do the same exact thing whenever we want. I was also using this as an opportunity to refine the overall form a little bit. Again, it's not going to be perfectly smooth at this point. I'm not really concerned about that. We can address all of that later when we go in and do a Z remesh pass on a lot of this. Maybe even separate out plates. I think in general, I probably will not be separating out plates. It just gets a little bit messy. I don't know. If this was like a strictly hard surface, actually armor pieces, maybe I would do that. But since these are ostensibly connected by living tissue, you know, if we look at the plates between, let's see if we can find a good example. I mean, yeah, they are tightly connected and clearly separated so that there can be movement, but it's not like we're going to animate the plates differently or anything. In that sense, it won't be completely realistic because, I mean, we'll try to avoid stretching and bending and warping hard surfaces, but you know, that's just kind of expected with something like this. Nobody really notices in the final product if like something that is supposed to be even in games that have like armor and you know things that are actually metal and are not supposed to bend. You look closely at the character models and in many places at least, they are bending. Of course, now people are getting much more advanced with all that kind of stuff. And like really, high AAA titles, they're probably um, independently animating a lot of those pieces. And even, especially with things like pauldrons and stuff, usually those are separated out, so they're not bending so much with everything else. Uh, but yeah, with something organic like this, not particularly concerned about it. Oh man. All right, so let's go back. Sorry, crab guy. I'm moving on. We do have kind of an interesting difference between these two sides. This one is kind of overlapping there, and this one is not. This is kind of more interesting. I think let's do it that way. A little bit of, even though overall we're being symmetrical, having a little bit of asymmetry on each side respectively, I think is a little bit more interesting. Having this plate kind of come down to protect the outer side a little bit more. And then it goes up to make room for that heel flexion. All right, let's reverse the selection, go into move, and then start to nudge these things out. Oh, actually, one thing we can do is just use Alt with the move tool. This is way quicker than what I was just doing. If you hold down Alt with the move tool, it will move perpendicular to the surface that you are moving it up, moving it away from, moving it from. So that's really useful actually, in stuff like this. I'm just gonna remesh. All right, let's do this internal plate as well. Just really quick, kind of mimic the plate on the top. This will be interesting to see how this all comes together. If it's asymmetrical on one side, but on the back, it looks pretty symmetrical. So I don't know. We'll see. All right, Alt, move, Alt, move, Alt, move. There we go. Let's just kind of nudge these things around, clean it up a little. Cool. All right, let's continue on. I'm going to kind of refine the shape of this a little bit. All right, let's go to 4. I'm just going to kind of sketch out the outline of this. It's not quite an oval. Kind of comes down like this. Actually, there appears to be quite a bit more of a gap between these two. So I'm going to nudge that. Same over here. I don't know, let's just try this, see what happens. Just gonna go around, define it a little bit. Let's do this one too. And this one. Let's just hit them with a little inflate, deformation. Yeah, kind of works. But this one's a little bit more pointed at the end. And then we'll want to have some of that. Let's see here. Was the smaller one was on the inside? Yeah. I think I've changed that up a little bit. So let's go to move, shrink this one down. Let's see from the top. I think we want to have these are kind of pointed inward, which I don't want. So let's kind of just rotate till these are pointed outward. That is a bit more of a strong position, a bit more of a balanced position. All right, I don't want to get too bogged down in these details here, so I'm probably going to leave these alone for now. I'm just going to kind of brush in some sculpt. Sometimes that is the best way to keep things moving and keep them defined, is to just get in there and make some marks. Not going to worry too much about the bottom of the feet right now. Although, eventually we will want to define that properly. It's something that often gets missed, at least for me. And then the back, we want to make sure we have these areas. Take that in. All right, good enough for now. I'm going to just going to kind of increase the distance here. So we're really doubling down on that asymmetry. And the shape of this is a little different. It kind of tapers in at the sides. This is definitely a tricky area because every time I edit something on one side, it might screw something up on a different side. So it's a little bit tricky. But I think it's just time to move on to, let's go to the arms. All right, what do we got going on here? We have some overlap on the back. I think we want to have a little bit more of a arc happening here. So let's go to move. Just bring this out. There we go. A little bit more thickness. And let's see. Just going to start kind of sketching in some of this stuff. A little bit of a segment around this. I'm going to turn off back face mask, or turn on back face mask rather. So when we're sculpting on these little pointy parts, it doesn't affect the opposite side anytime we're sculpting on something thin. Actually, I do have it up here on my my menu. I always forget, but I also have it under the auto masking menu. Nice. Go to S, shift down. Using damn standard, carve in some of these areas. Then back to clay brush. Resisting the temptation to increase the Dynamesh resolution. It's a good way to remind yourself to not get caught up in details. Excuse me. Is by keeping your Dynamesh resolution consistent for as long as you can. If you switch to a higher resolution or feel the need to do that, that's probably a sign that you're getting too wrapped up in details. So I'm looking at the interior. Again, I'm very grateful that I did the interior of this hand on the far side because now I can actually, grateful to my past self, that is. Um, I can actually look at it, and I think this thumb is a little bit, I think we need to push it in a little bit towards the center of the hand. So I'm just gonna try to do that with the move brush. Let's see how that goes for us. Yeah, the movement controls require a lot of patience. Like if you start, if I start kind of working more like frantically, that's when the movement just starts to fight me. You know, you kind of have to almost slow things down enough to allow it to register your movements, or else it just starts randomly popping in different directions because you're overlapping different inputs, um, especially with a pen. So ZBrush is definitely a good exercise in patience, if nothing else. So I'm having these kind of movable areas kind of fold in a little bit over the palm. It's not quite human, but it's alluding to something human, um, which is, you know, a lot of what we're doing with this character. And the funny thing is, I realized with this design is that the advantage of the lobster claw is to have some kind of pincer movement, and this guy doesn't really have that. So I don't know. It looks cool. I'm not sure what he's gonna do with the. I mean, these claws are basically good for smashing and digging, more so than for pinching. So I don't know. That can be something that we build in our own headcanon. You know, in terms of his role, his evolutionary role, in terms of his, if there's a society of lobster people, in terms of his role within that society. I mean, I guess if they're all the same race, they all have these kind of pinching and or these bashing and digging claws. Um, so maybe they're not, you know, predators so much. Maybe they are in fact a peaceful race of tunnelers. Um, you know, maybe they are maybe they use these claws to pry open um, large kind of clam creatures or something like that. Um, so every, you know, every bit of design tells part of a story. And in this case, we're kind of letting that design fall or the story follow our design versus letting the design dictate our aesthetic choices. But you know, in either case, they should be referencing one another. You know, it's something you should be paying attention to in your concept. All right, so it looks like we have 2 plates along the mimicking kind of the tricep region here. So let's get those defined. Just going to kind of smooth this out first. Make sure the silhouette is roughly in the right place. Let's do the top one here. Goes down like this. Reverse. Move, Alt, pull it out. Maybe that might be a little too far. Kind of bend it so it doesn't lose its concave shape. All right, remesh. And let's go in, and this area is not super well defined in our concept, so I think we're gonna just kind of make a few things up. That's fine. We'll kind of get into the details of that later, which is always really fun. Details can be very very exciting and fun, and that's, I think, why a lot of people, including myself, when I started out, really wanted to dive into those. But it's important to resist the temptation for a while, especially with 3D, because if you start doing details too soon, you're just making life harder for yourself. Later, you'll probably end up having to redo a lot of them later on in the process, especially if you don't have your silhouette really well defined and you make a whole bunch of details and you realize you have to nudge everything around to fix your silhouette, and a lot of your details are going to get stretched and warped and look really bad. There's some ways around that. You know, in Zbrush, where you can kind of work on the details and larger silhouette separately without too much conflict between them. One of those is using subdivisions. One of those is I'm trying to remember. There's like a I can't remember. I mean, yeah, there are quite a few different ways to do that, but just in terms of the overall workflow, you know, it's good to have as much of this locked in as possible. First, you know what I just remembered is there's something very much like this that exists in Fallout. Let's see. Mario Lurk. Yeah. These guys are cool. There was a different version in Fallout. Yeah, in Fallout 3. This is a little bit closer to what we're doing. And then, yeah, the Mario King. Not exactly what we're doing. I just kind of wanted to check to see if there was a lot of overlap there. Somebody in the Discord group also dropped something another artist did for a Lobster Man concept in Zbrush, which it's really funny seeing like how differently 2 artists can interpret that prompt, even though that wasn't really a prompt. It was just sort of something I kind of happened upon. But yeah, similar concept, 2 very different executions. It was very like stylized and very well done, but not very different from what we're doing here. Just gonna refine these shoulder bits a little bit. I think we need more definition around the arms. We have, again, these two. Now, they're different plates? Yeah, they're definitely going to be different plates. So I think one goes from about here to about here, and then it slides, say, underneath those ones. Actually, let's just do this as one plate because the two segments are pretty similar in size here. So let's do this. I'm just going to smooth this out first. And then let's do move. And in this case, our edge is a little wobbly, so actually what I'm going to do is reverse this, and then let's actually push this side in because this line is a little bit weird. So let's see. Okay, go back to our damn standard. I think this wants to go out a little bit. Let's just see here. Again, I'm working on the smaller of the two pauldrons. I'm going to create a separate shape. Actually, I might as well just do that now. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm going to turn off symmetry, hit X. I'm just going to actually take this rough shape here, and let's extract it. Let's do 0.05. Let's try that. Extract, maybe 0.06. Extract, accept. Okay. Now we have this other subtool. I'm going to name these. Let's do main body. And then, what is this? The left shoulder. So if we isolate it, you can see this is pretty much the shape that we need. Let's Dynamesh it. And already this is a lot more interesting because we have some asymmetry. So it's kind of, actually these need to be tucked in a little bit. That's what I'm seeing here. Let's return on symmetry. But yeah, just introducing a little bit of asymmetry is really can go a long way. So let's just kind of pull and nudge this where we want it. I'm not going to worry about the antenna today. I mean, we could rough them out, but it's not really any point because we already have those in the concept. And I might even use Blender's curve tools for that, since I prefer that over Zbrush's curve tools quite a bit. So we'll probably do that part in Blender later on. So for now, he's just going to be antenna-less. Okay. I'm going to increase or decrease the Dynamesh. So I really want to get this silhouette right. So on the back, I'm seeing we have this piece coming out, and then we have some horns coming out here. And then this part goes in. This comes out again. And then on kind of this bulbous shape here. I'm not going to worry too much about these individual spikes and stuff, but I'm just going to kind of sketch them out anyway. I'll probably end up redoing those. Just want to get an approximate. Okay, looks like this comes in actually versus going out. And then just kind of a curve here. Shifts up a little bit. And then we have this piece. I'm going to use the move in tool to kind of like crimp this edge a little bit. I don't know if that's the right term, but let's actually look at some of our okay. All right, so from this angle, let's check our back view. From this angle, I think it needs to go a little bit over this way. Maybe a little bit up. And these are poking out a little bit more this way. Let's check our overall silhouette too while we're here. On the back view, I think the back is a little bit larger in our sculpt, but I kind of like it. Let's see what happens if we... Yeah. It's pretty close. A little bit more dynamic here. I kind of like that. He's got a little bit more broad shoulders going on. Should probably dig into this gap a little bit more. Create more space there. This armpit area is really critical point for animation, so it's really good to have as much of a clean gap in there as you can. I should probably separate out these back plates even more. Let's do reversing dam standard. Again, I don't really have any information on this area. I'm just kind of winging it. Let's see how the neck is shaping up here. Not really sure. I think I intended for this to go in here, so Let's try that. And then there are just some kind of, this is like skin folds zone. And then these circle around. I think there are a few plates here. I'm not really entirely sure how this neck area is going to work. I didn't really... I know I want those little gill things. Or whatever they are. I think there are just going to be a few kind of plates here. Although this is looking a little bit... He needs a little bit more room to move. But I don't think we need as much room, as much neck space as a human would have. I imagine this guy has other senses he can draw from a little bit, and I don't know. Maybe he doesn't need to be using his eyes so much. Let's see. All right. Before I do want to put a little time into the face just so it reads a little better, but before we do that, I want to make sure that we have our some of these areas more defined. Let's see about... I don't really know what's happening on the inside of the arm. I want to say this plate wraps around a little further. But then I think we're just going to have a whole bunch of kind of meaty bits here. That's what I'm seeing on this left side. Actually, I'm just going to use that as my reference for a bit. Kind of sketch some of this stuff in. Seems like this is kind of an unprotected area a little bit. I'm going to extend this plate a little bit further. Unprotected area where we can have a lot of... In fact, let's use our standard brush, which I haven't really used much, but it's good for just sketching in some skin and stuff. But yeah, I think everything in here, there's not really any need for armor. So we're just going to have to kind of figure out... It's going to be more like organic skin kind of stuff, which is just cool to have some of those areas. I don't think we have very many of them. Yeah, let's create some kind of flex wrinkles here. Let's see. Yeah, it's pretty close. Maybe you want to have... I do have some kind of conflicting ideas happening on the right and left side about how this piece works. And we can just have them be different. I mean, I think I am going to do a different right and left claw. Um, but we'll just leave it as it is for now. Um, all right, let's return to the face. Let's just get this guy looking. I want to capture some of the personality in here before we move on. So, whoops. Let's go into damn standard. I think I'm going to go ahead and create some eyeball objects here. All right, let's do append, sphere, mirror, and weld. Turn on symmetry, shrink down. Probably about that size. We actually have 2 of them. So let's duplicate. I mean, this is pretty micro detail for what we're doing right now. But can't hurt to have them there as kind of guides. So let's go back to this. So we have something to sculpt around, basically. I think this second one just need to be... Honestly, I don't even know if we'll need this, but... Probably a bit premature to add that part in. But want to give him some good cheekbones here. And then these mandibles will probably be separated at some point because it would be cool to animate those. He's definitely looking strange. Not what I was going for exactly. I think he's missing... all right, let's duplicate these. Again, probably getting into a little bit more detail than needed to, but whatever. Let's just do one of these. This is just really important for his face silhouette. So I'm just kind of blocking this in because let's just hit this with inflate. Kind of blocking this in because I just want to make sure all the parts are working together. So let's go to geometry. Dynamesh. Okay. Thinking maybe it's these back spikes on his head. They're just looking kind of odd. And maybe his head's a little too wide. Again, I'm still like, I'm really pushing the limits of the pixels here, but I'm still not going to a higher resolution just yet. But it's funny, you know, for a crustacean, this guy has a lot of personality, and I want to make sure I capture that. Even just in the silhouette phase. I think something that we've been lacking is this kind of cranial bulge, which I talked about earlier, which kind of makes him seem more intelligent and human-like. So I think we've been lacking that, which is really important for this character. I think that helps, yeah. And also, I think reducing some of these, I think giving him just more of a rounder kind of head shape, and then leaving the spikes to take care of the silhouette is sort of the way to go here. So I'm actually really leaning heavily into the human skull for the top of his head. And maybe we will make his eyes facing forward a little bit more, since that's a bit more of a human characteristic as well. All right, let's look at it from, let's shrink these down a little bit. Looking at it from this same angle as our, you know what we haven't done yet too is let's just throw a quick render on this. See what it looks like. Let's do render. Let's do increase the angle of the shadow. Let's put on render properties. Let's turn on AO. See what that does for us. I'm noticing too his feet are kind of a little bit off. Let's do render APR shadow. Oh my god, come on. APR shadow. Let's do a few more rays. Let's increase the angle slightly. Let's try that. All right, we are getting there. I'm actually kind of on the fence about this second pair of eyes. I think let's just remove them for now just because it's a little bit distracting. Just want to focus on the forms of the face. And I want them to have kind of human eyelids, which we can't really do with this resolution. We can sketch in some of the, I don't know, for the spikes. I don't really want them to be super symmetrical, but I guess some of them can be. Again, for the antenna, might do something for that in Blender. Let's see. There we go. I think this is pretty close to what we want for our blockout. Let's see here. Let's look at the overall silhouette. Well, I think his hip and leg positions are slightly different, but can kind of attribute that to the pose a little bit more than the actual sculpt. I think his knees need to go up again. They keep shifting down for some reason. What else? Everything else is looking pretty good. Maybe his head just needs to come up a little bit more. I'm just going to use move for these. I don't really care. They don't have to be perfect spheres yet. Yeah. I think we're in a good spot here, so I may just call it for today. Oh man. Yeah, pretty good for a blockout. Again, we haven't really dived into too much details here. Dived. We have not dived into too many details. Divin. But yeah, I mean, this is exactly where I would want to be at the end of a blockout phase. We haven't really separated anything out too much yet. I think besides this pauldron, or yeah, it's basically what it is. And these mandibles probably have maybe a few other moving mouth parts. I don't really see any need to separate anything else out. Maybe, nah. I mean, if we are animating it, getting these to move without stretching is going to be important. Probably will want to include a lot of extra loops around the border regions there, but these are probably not going to end up moving that much. I mean, maybe a little bit, like if he's doing like a intimidating kind of attack thing, he might spread them out a little bit, but these are not even really, they're kind of almost vestigial digits. So let's see what else. Let's throw a BPR render on there again. Oh, I think maybe also his eyes are a little bit lower. Let's try that. Yeah, I mean, there's always room for fine tuning and all that kind of stuff. We can throw, let's throw a few of these spikes on here. Actually, you know, a really quick way to kind of do that. So if we go in, we just do one of these, boom, 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 whoops, boom, boom, step it. These, do a little big, medium, small there. Reverse it. Let's do that same thing. Let's just do the super rough. Doesn't really matter. Almost like straight low poly. Remesh. Smooth. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that'll be it for today. Thanks for those of you who popped in for a minute. And keep an eye out for the next stream. Probably be next Sunday. I will be taking this into more of a detail sculpt, probably breaking out any asymmetrical parts, which might be limited to the claws, but also, you know, in terms of the detailing, there's a lot of room for asymmetry there. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out in the Discord for announcements about that, or just subscribe to the YouTube channel here so you get a notification when I'm going live. I tend to schedule those in advance. Yeah, that'll be it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next one.